Christa Dhimo. Oh, what an absolute pleasure speaking to Christa, a social scientist. Do you know what that means? Of course, I like to open up the conversation with something personal. She has a bearded dragon named Cleo. She brings Cleo out. She happens to be walking right past her during the conversation. I don't know anybody who has a bearded dragon. We talk about why that's attractive to have a reptile. She's got dogs and how they interact and how she got the dragon. Of course, it was her daughter. It's not exactly what you're thinking, by the way, but it's an interesting story. Her other hobby is that she analyzes song structure. So you heard me right. I mean, she's a former musician, but she loves to get songs. And the way she really enjoys them is kind of unpacking them, understanding the different areas and how they all synchronize and come together. And then we launch right into what she helps businesses these days in highly regulated industries, because that kind of chose her, but she helps them with strategy and leadership and innovation. And of course, she adapts everything she knows in her social sciences as well. But she's fascinatingly well-rounded, the way she approaches everything. I always bring up art versus behavior because it's just fascinating how people make decisions. One of the main reasons why I enjoy talking to people is perspective. She has a unique one, and discipline. She introduced the word to discipline that I've never heard before associated with discipline. Absolutely wonderful talking to Christa. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because I was working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Taking compliments. Thank you.
Good. We're doing well with that. How do you prefer to be addressed?
Joe is fine.
Joe. Okay.
Joe's fine. Joey's fine. Yeah. Christa, you're the only person I know that I've ever talked to that care and study bearded dragons.
Oh, really? I have her running around in my office right now.
Now you're up there in the Northeast and she's running. You say it's a she. Wow. And what do you feed her? What's her name?
She gets said, this is Cleo.
Hi, Cleo.
Short for Cleopatra.
Ah.
And she gets salad. Look at her beautiful orange. When she's orange, she's really happy.
Aww. How old is she?
She's about 1.5 years old.
And how old will she live to be?
They live 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
She eats salads, so just leafy vegetables and bugs. So usually dubia roaches. And there's a whole community where you can get them, but I have a place about 10 minutes away that they specialize in reptiles. So yeah.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. And is she potty trained?
No. Although bearded dragons, they don't eat a lot. Once they get into adulthood, they don't eat frequently. They eat a little bit. And so they don't go to the bathroom a lot, but they go to the bathroom the same as birds do. So they have a white urate and then followed by, of course, their little fecal samples that they like to eat.
Very interesting. And they're affectionate.
They're very, look at her. They're very affectionate. They're very interactive. Hi. Hello.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And she's just free. She's not, does she sleep in a bed?
She has an enclosure. So she's usually,
Enclosure.
because as a lizard, she needs UVB rays, UVA rays, she needs
Ah,
heat.
ah.
She needs those kinds of things. But I usually let her just run around for a couple hours a day.
And how were you introduced to the bearded dragons?
My youngest daughter, who will be
Ah.
10 next week, I grew up with dogs. We have 2 dogs. I grew up with cats. I grew up with guinea pigs, right? I
Mm.
mean, I had a little bit of the exotics, but not a reptile. And she wanted something different. And she said, I would like to have a reptile. And she was looking at a couple different ones. And a friend of mine who's maybe 5 or 10 years younger than me. So there's like this big, if anybody's in their 20s now, you're probably going to meet, I would say, like, this isn't scientifically supported, but I would say 2 out of 5 have had a bearded dragon or have
Interesting.
held a bearded dragon versus people of a certain age. It's like, really?
Yeah.
What is a bearded dragon? So I asked her, I said, what, you've had bearded dragons. Tell me a little bit more, because Define is interested. And she's like, oh, they're great. They're fairly low maintenance. They're good starter reptiles. They're very interactive and social and easy to care for and all of those things. So my husband and we said to our daughter, you have to research it. You have to tell us how you're going to take care of it. We don't know anything about reptiles. You have to, like, state your case.
Mm.
And she did that for probably 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And then she's so funny. And then we said, okay, well, let's just see, and we went to this place where one of our dogs goes there for day camp. And I saw Cleo,
Wow.
and she was older. She was probably 2 months old. And usually people get them when they're little tiny lizards. And they said, oh, we're looking to adopt that one out because we want older reptiles just go to nice homes. And I was like, she's the one.
Huh.
And I just took her. She's basically mine. So sometimes people are like, oh yeah, you're taking care of
Right.
the reptile now because you're the mom. And I'm like, no, it wasn't like that at all.
Wow.
I took over, and I'm not a takeover kind of person. I mean, if I see a gap that needs to be filled, I kind of look around and wait a little while, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. But in this case, I was like, move over,
Huh.
move over. She's mine. Yeah, I just love her. She's amazing.
And how does she get along with the dogs?
So our oldest dog, who's about 20 pounds, he's 11. He was fine.
Hmm.
And he's a terrier mix, so I wasn't quite
Oh.
sure, but
Oh.
he was fine. He was like, oh, hey, how's it going? I mean, this is the dog that if I'm mowing the lawn, he'll be right in front of the lawnmower, and I have to. He's just very copacetic, just very.
Huh.
But the younger dog, she's 2. She's 70 pounds.
Whoa.
So afraid.
Really?
So afraid. Yeah. She looked at it like how people look at bugs. She was like, I'm just going to get out of here. She's getting a little bit warmer to her, and Cleo couldn't care less. She's
Right.
just like, hey everyone, how you doing? Yeah.
And what Krista could seem almost the opposite of taking care of pets and kind of the love and the dynamic there would be analyzing song structures.
I'm sorry, analyzing.
Song structures.
Oh, song structures. Oh, yes. Oh, I love doing that. So it's interesting because it's a little bit like my work too.
Okay.
So, I'm a trained musician and a couple of different instruments, and then I was a singer for a little while, and I come from a long line of musicians. Salvatore Cavicchio, who, if anybody's in Sudbury, Massachusetts, they'll know who that is. He was on the marimba for a number of years and big in the 30s and the 40s, especially in the Boston area. And so it just runs in the family. So I've always had a musical ear, and then I studied it also. And now I do audiation. So if I hear a song and then I know the song, I will hear all of it. So I hear the full orchestration. I hear every bit and piece of it. if I had more of a photographical memory, I could probably chart all of the pieces of it. And now as a hobby, one of the things I do is I listen to Rick Beato. I listen to the One Song podcast, Interpolation,
Yes.
and I love it. I love it. It's looking at the different aspects of the song and how they interrelate to each other and how it creates a different, you could get really geeky and think of how you get a different cognitive response when you hear different notes put together. There's dissonance, which gives you tension, and then you can resolve that, and major and minor chords, and just how you feel, how your brain feels. There's all kinds of fMRIs and things that talk about the aspects of the brain that lights up for that. So, you can get that geeky about it. But for me, I find it fascinating because there are some musicians and some songwriters who they don't have a formal background in music, and yet what they can create. So when you think of the Beatles, right, what they can create, and they used a lot of minor chords in their songs, and people went crazy for it. And it's not like, a couple of them had some formal training, but it's not like they had 30 years of formal training. They were like 20-year-olds, right?
Right.
when they came out of Liverpool. So I love that. I find it fascinating, and it's some people knit. That's I listen to the structure of music.
Wow. Do you have synesthesia where you see colors when you hear sounds?
No, I don't. No.
So if you hear a song for the first time, you mentioned Rick Beato is great, and so if you hear a song you've never heard before,
Mm-hmm.
do you enjoy the song by kind of pulling it apart?
A little bit, yeah. That's right. And if I really love it, I listen to it over and over again, and I'm hearing things that probably other people can't hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what, you're putting headphones on and you're getting pad and paper and you're writing things like, explain to me how you kind of decipher a song.
Oh, not that technical, but there are some songs that I do get that technical. So Muse, the band Muse, there are
Yes.
some of their songs where I get that technical, where I will put earbuds in and I get into a zone and layer upon layer upon layer, or even Def Leppard's song Hysteria. I mean, it's just, I don't know how many guitar tracks there are. I think I counted 4 just by my own ear. I don't know how many there are, but that's a perfect song where I will listen to it over and over again. And when it came out in 1987 or whenever it did,
Late 80s.
I sat down, stop, rewind,
Wow.
stop, rewind, and every bit and piece of it. But I've done that with musical shows too. So Les Mis, I did that, and the same thing. And I just revisited Les Mis again, maybe 5 years ago. And I hadn't listened to it in probably 10 years. But when I listened to it again after a 10-year break, I was blown away by the layers. Like it was the first time I heard it, and I was hearing different things I had never heard before. So the Star Wars
John
theme
Williams.
music, like I can think about that and then have it play in my head, and I could not note for note. I have somewhat of perfect pitch, but not to the point where I would trust myself to chart it. But I could definitely just knowing the song, I can write down the length of the song. I could write down the pitch levels of the song for probably most of the instruments that are played.
Wow. Have you ever enjoyed a song without doing this, without opening it up?
So that is how I enjoy the song.
That's how you enjoy it.
If
That's
I
how
don't
you
enjoy a
enjoy it.
song, I usually, my brain just doesn't do that, and it's not a conscious. It's not an on
Interesting.
or off switch where I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this now. I think the more I love the song, the more geeked out I get about it, because the structure of the song is like everybody's starting just now in the last 6 months, year, talking about how amazing some of the Tears for Fears songs are. And I'm like, yeah, I was deep into that one back in whenever it was, 1986 or
Yeah, the 80s.
I mean, I listen to modern music too.
Of
I don't
course,
listen to
of
just
course.
40-year-old music.
So so a great song is really a broken puzzle piece to you, and it's up to you to kind of put it all together so you can really appreciate.
So I would think of it more like a system
Ah,
than something that's broken. I think of it more as something that's so well put together
interesting.
that I admire and appreciate how well it was put together. And there's sometimes very subtle things that are so genius. And some of that has to do with the production, right? Who's
Mm,
changing the levers on the production board
mm,
or
mm,
whatever they
mm.
use these days. Mhm.
Do you do it with food or anything else?
Oh, that's a great question. No. I do it with businesses.
Of course,
So
yes.
it's the same thing. I look at it the
Ah,
same way, but I wouldn't. No, I don't think I do that. Even with books. I mean, there's some books that they're very character driven and dialogue driven, and I
fiction.
think I appreciate books that are dialogue driven for that same reason because you have to listen to the character's voice and
Mm,
what the character is saying sets the tone and shifts around the plot line less than what the character is doing.
hmm,
So it makes it more appealing for me.
hmm. Fascinating. What is a social scientist, Krista?
So scientist is somebody who studies something using the scientific method,
Mm,
which is just it's a very rigid sounding phrase for using a template or recipe or structure or framework to say, I'm going to ask an interesting question, and then I'm going to test a few things to find out what the answer is.
hmm,
And in science, the goal isn't to find out the final answer, it's to find out how close to an answer you can trust is, like how close you
whoa.
are to an answer you can trust, because science should be ongoing, right? You
Mm,
shouldn't, some would argue that math is a type of science, but math is finite, right? One plus one typically equals
mm,
two. In the science domain, of the scientific domain, you're asking questions that are like what you've asked, Joe, where you say, you might ask, well, how many, let me ask a few more questions about Christa to see some common denominator values of her. And now let me find a whole bunch of other people who seem like Christa. And now let me ask how many of them do that type of musical
mm,
analysis. How many do that because they want to versus how many people do that because they don't have a choice? It's just the
mm,
way their brain works and they love it, and so it's not whether they want to or not. So a scientist is trained to ask those questions and then work through a scientific method that will come to a conclusion that says, here's how close to something I trust is. And that's when it's called significance. So you're saying, I have 95% confidence. And there are big math equations and high powered studies. And so I'm with 95% confidence. I'm pretty sure that a woman of yeah, I'm 52. So a woman who's in her 50s, who was presumably raised, or you could test this in inclusion criteria, she was raised during the new wave, right? Has a tendency to do this. I have 95% confidence. And then you can have certain controls. If she has an Italian background
mm,
with musicians, that 95% goes up to 99%.
hmm,
If she is of Irish background with musicians, that also goes up to 99%. But if you take away the musicians in the family, that stays at 95%.
hmm,
So that is what a scientist does. And I don't care what you're studying. If you're a
mm,
trained scientist, that's what the scientific method is. That's what you're doing. So a social scientist is somebody who does that work studying how humans socialize, how
hmm,
they interact with each other, how they are influenced, how they're motivated. Some of it is related to the psychology, although we're not focused so much on the brain and the behavior of the brain. Some of it might be focused on neuroscience or neuropsychology. So that's related to how the brain might create emotions and things like that. For social scientists, and part of why business is considered a social science, except for economics, but that's a different kind of science.
Mm.
But social science is because really what you're trying to do, if you're looking to help businesses work the best way they can, you are trying to figure out what it takes to get good humans to work well together
Mm.
toward a goal that they can either meet or exceed within a certain amount of time, within a certain budget, with other limited resources, with perhaps only half of the managers knowing what they're doing and knowing how to do well with their humans, their good humans,
Mm.
um, with maybe 60 or 70% of those good employees who have other things going on in their lives. So everything else is filling up a space in their brain that may interact with or influence or affect how well they're able to perform in the work environment. And so it's a long answer, but hopefully I've demonstrated what a social scientist is and also what we do.
When did you know you wanted to become one?
I was probably 6 or 7 years old,
Whoa.
but I had no idea that's what it was.
I
So I
see.
didn't know that's what it was until I was probably in my 40s. And I studied sociology for undergrad. I was in pre-law. I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I probably needed a skip year back then, but that's not, you'll never get back to school, right?
Mm.
Um, and they just, a lot of times they didn't have this kind of language, and it's just not how business was talked about. It's not how social science was talked about. And I don't think it really started being discussed like this in industry till probably about 10 years ago, where
Mm.
you started seeing more and more people in academics doing applied research. So, how does this work in the real world? And maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago, we finally started to see some business researchers, academics coming out with their research to talk about, like, probably the most famous one is Simon Sinek, where everybody was like, oh, it's all about the why. But if
Why?
anybody were to look at the Peter Drucker books from the 40s, he was saying the same thing. It's just, it wasn't as formal, and that's not what people were talking about. That's not how they were talking about it.
I mean, when we studied sociology in college, it was the study of humans in groups, but it was generally early man studies. It wasn't kind of today. So it's a big difference now to study what's happening now versus then.
Or it could be societal studies,
I
like
see.
sociology, what drives crime rates up, what drives crime
Uh,
rates down. Sometimes it's a feeder into public health research. It's so I know, or I knew, of social science is more like that.
I
It's a
see.
study of how people operate within a society, and to your point, within groups. But I think a big piece of it is how they interact within groups and with each other. And I mean, frankly, that's how business gets done, right? I tell everybody all the time, business is not that complicated. It's a process. As long as
Mm.
you have more than one person, chances are you have a business. If you have some money flow and more than one person, it's a business. Even if it's just one person, but you still need some kind of, at least like a parasocial or para relationship, like how some
Mm.
of your listeners might feel about you. It's like, one could say you're a solopreneur, but one could also argue, oh, well, that doesn't fit in the same context that it always did, because he does podcasts and
Mm.
people listen in and they gain something from it and they develop a relationship with you, even though they don't know you per se.
And we've talked for a short while, Krista, but I think I already know the answer to this. But why work with regulated industries?
That was also not a conscious
I
decision.
say.
I fell into that.
Mm.
It was always a matter of where the work was, and sometimes where the work was required. So
Mm.
in highly regulated industries, so highly regulated just means it's federally regulated, and that's true for any group across the world. That's not just a term that's being used in the United States. They require certain buttoned up way of doing business.
Mm.
They protect consumers. They make sure there's a measure of safety. They make sure there's a measure of or reduction of fraud, and there's a measure of truth in what people are selling. It's kind of why we don't, most of the time we don't hear snake oil anymore like we used
Mm.
to back in the 1800s, that kind of thing. So highly regulated industries is something I fell into, and looking back, I think a lot of that is because those are the industries that value a lot of the work that I do above and beyond others, because there's an expectation that they have somebody like me on board, or there's an expectation that they're going to be really efficient if they have to do a remediation.
Yeah, sometimes the work picks you. You know, I had a consulting in New Haven, just south of you,
Yeah,
tech, you know, and I had it got we were near Yale University, so we got a couple
yeah,
of architects, and next thing you know, we had 20. All of a sudden, we're the architect specialists. So
yeah.
it's just kind of happens that way. When you work with these companies, Krista, what are some common things that breakthroughs that you see that they need?
There are a couple of them. I think first and foremost, there's usually a quick and intense education at the top level of
Mm,
leadership. If they're in trouble, that's certainly part of it. There's usually also issues with the organizational structure. So I just did some work related to
hmm,
organizational structure, because people people end up in executive roles, and there's a like, I think you should know the basics about business. That's just how I am. If
mm,
you're an executive in a business, then you're charged with making decisions that will impact your business. And not all those decisions are about revenue or
mm,
how you're going to save money in terms of your operating costs, right? A lot of it are things that get more technical with the business, like when it comes to structure. So sometimes the organizational structure isn't where it needs to be. There are too many layers of decisions, or there's not a good form of or flow of communication that occurs. I mean, the Boeing 737, the Max, right?
right.
A lot of the reports that came out, and they're still coming out, had to do with a breakdown in communication. There's a lot of layers where the engineers were like, "We need to change this. We have some concerns." And then what the reports are saying is that up at the top, they're like, "Oh, we didn't hear about that." Now,
Hmm.
I actually studied that case for
Wow.
a number of years because of some of my research with employee voice behavior and what it takes for employees to speak up and so forth. So I will tell you that it is ongoing and evolving.
Wow.
How many people talked about it, whether they talked about it, if the information got where it needed to go at the same time. But that's an example. So I'd say those are the two most common things that I see. One is that senior leaders, they just really need to be educated. They somehow got into this role that's so critical in a highly regulated industry, and they're not aware of some of the most critical regulations. They don't need to be aware of all
Hmm.
of them, but you should be aware of some of the most critical ones, because those are the ones that will have an impact on your strategy. And I think the second one is the structure of the organization. Sometimes it's just not structured to have a better communication flow or better understanding of how to make good decisions for the best of the business.
Hmm. We see that like in tech where an engineer does so well and is, does so well for a long time. We promote them to a manager spot. They get a raise, but they actually don't end up, they're not really being a technician anymore. And they don't really understand that skill set. They want
Yes.
the raise, they want the escalation.
Yes.
In sales, that happens too. These people, kill at sales for years and they get promoted up to a certain level where they're not really doing that anymore. They don't really understand what needs to be done there.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. And you probably run into this a lot being in tech, because tech runs fast.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of changes that take place. And so as soon as you have this shift, especially if it's a paradigm shift, right? That happens a
Mm,
lot in tech. So
mm,
as soon as you have that kind of shift, if you have people making decisions based on the mindset of old technology, a lot of times it's just not compatible. You might be able to get by for a little while, but I'm sure
mm,
you've seen that too, Joe, where suddenly you're like, that worked 5 years ago. It doesn't
mm.
work anymore because the world's in a different place
Huh.
now. Even like processing times are so fast now compared to where they were even 2 years ago. I mean, look what we're doing here. Right? 5 years ago, you couldn't do this as easily.
Yeah,
You
that's
could
right.
do it, but there'd be breakdowns, there'd be glitches, there'd be slowdowns, all kinds of things. It's you could do different things graphically now. It doesn't cost a fortune to do that kind of thing. You can reach a broader audience because people are so interested. You can hit your niche for people interested in listening to your show and listening to some of your guests. So if you have people who cannot evolve their mindsets, or if they don't have the coaching or somebody caring enough about their future success, and I see some, I would say, disregard for that as people promote into the executive levels. Not that they no longer want to learn, but I see a disregard for people looking out to them to say, hey, Christa, a couple of things are coming down the pike. These are things you should probably learn about. So why don't you get on that? I don't see a lot of that. So yeah, I've seen it. I'm sure you see it in the work that you do too.
Well, the big, game changer, world changer is AI. I mean, we just
Yes.
see, SEO is going to be different. I mean, it's going to, how is AI affecting you and what you do?
I don't know yet, in
Mm.
part because looking at it from a scientific domain, AI has been used to some extent. I mean, one could argue that an algorithm, when I was talking about the social scientists, right? If you have quantitative data, it's run through a
Mm.
big application, SSPS or something where M plus, there's something that you're computing a lot of data through something, and sometimes it's a predictive model, sometimes it's all sorts of things. That AI is so accessible now and runs so quickly.
Mm.
I think that even in some of the engineering groups that I work with, I don't see it being as disruptive as I see it perhaps in other industries. It's more of a, oh, good, whew, that'll make it easier.
Mm.
That's a
Mm.
lot of what I'm seeing in the spaces that I work in.
Mm.
I think it does beg the question as to whether people ask the right questions, though. And I also believe that it's one of those things where people talk about whether AI will replace humans, and I think it's just because it's just a misnomer. It's like
Mm.
there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. It's not intelligent. Like,
Right.
there's a definition for intelligence. That's not what this is, and it's not artificial. Like, that alone is scary because you're
Mm.
putting like a personality base on something that's not human. But it's like a massive computing system. It's massive computing that can happen very, very quickly and gather a lot of data from a lot of different places and do this kind of thing. Here you go. Here you go, Joe. What was your question? Here you go.
Mm.
You can ask anything. Here you go. What's the best pizza in Connecticut?
Mm.
Pepe's? Here you go.
Chris, we've got this great quote. Most boards kill companies.
Yes. Yep. Doesn't make me very popular,
No.
but it's true, especially for
Of course it
small
is.
and mid-sized companies,
Mm.
So small companies tend to get and startups tend to get boards either because they say, I guess we need one now,
Mm.
or because they're looking for people who have strong networks and can help them with fundraising. What they end up getting most times is people who are at a point in their career where they feel like they know a lot, and many
Mm.
times they do, because
Mm.
there is such a thing as, miles equals some level of experience, right? For sure. But that doesn't mean that they're capable or
Mm.
competent of being a
Mm.
good board member. And a lot of times that has to do with just asking a couple of questions, giving some feedback, coaching along the way, being able to remove yourself from your experiential background and instead being able to apply your experience to what that company needs or what
Mm.
that CEO needs. There are times when I have worked with and I've seen board members, Joe, who they come from pretty decent sized companies, and they're in a mid-sized company because they couldn't get into a larger size company. And
Mm.
at that level, it's usually personality. There is such a thing as the bully on the board. There is such a thing as somebody who no one wants to work with. But if you're a mid-sized company and you can get the former CFO slash COO from a large medical device company, you're going to take it. And then you're going to have to deal. So you get the name on the board.
Right.
You have the reputation on the board too, because some people will be like, oh, that person did really well for that company. But the people behind the scenes are like, oh boy, whew, that person's not an easy person to deal with. And then on that board, they're not easy to deal with either. And so that's a lot of what I talk about when I'm talking with boards. And most of the time, if I'm brought in, it's to help with a session on how do you break inertia that's limiting the innovation. And if it's not happening at the board level, it's not going to happen anywhere else. If you have a board that's, let's just keep doing what we've always been doing, and they may not be aware of that, but that happens a lot also, or a board that only convenes once a quarter and any other time they're just completely hands off, all of these contribute to what I consider killing off your company. And it's usually death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's not like an A2 Brute type of situation.
Right, Caesar. So is there when joining a board at that level, is there certain kind of code of conduct and certain expectations that are mandated? Do they actually sit and talk with somebody like you before they start voting and bickering and deciding?
No, certainly
Really?
not. It's a process. They go through a vetting
They
process,
do.
but it's not usually related to personality. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I see that happen also even at the senior leader and executive and C-suite level. Sometimes companies just need to get someone in there who has a background in sales, and you just know they're going to be able to raise money and all of those things. Sometimes their own inertia is because of luck and timing, and it's not something they can replicate. Sometimes they're protected assets. They know a lot of people who just continue to bring them in and to do different things. But if you want to get the most out of your business, if you want to get the most out of performance in an organization, you really have to identify what hits and misses on the human level, because I don't think there will ever come a time when only machines can do all the work of humans unless there's no humans left. Right? And then we're at Terminator time. And who cares at that point? We won't be
Skynet.
around. Who cares? By definition, we won't be there. When I see companies do well in spite of themselves, and some of my biggest frustrations, Joe, is when I take a look at an organization and I can immediately see how they could do 15 to 20% better in revenues and also in operational cost control if they just paid more attention to their people,
Wow.
or if they opened things up so that they were allowed to get energy to flow and for people to make certain decisions that they need to make at the level that they're at, or to put in place a reward and recognition system that actually works and really focuses in on the employees doing the work. So there's a lot behind that quote.
Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access, receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today. Yeah, there certainly is. And generally speaking, there's some egos there. So you have to be
Oh yeah.
very
Yes,
kind
not
of
generally speaking, yes.
yeah, always. I mean, we
Ego
hear these.
and id too. People forget about the id. So id is that impulse control, right? Ego is like, I wonder how everybody looks at me and stuff. But the id is even worse because that's
Ugh.
impulse control. That's the one that says that's your inner voice, Joe, that says, oh, you know what, Joe, maybe you shouldn't say that.
But we see this at the largest scale. We hear about it with Disney. We hear about the board and there's family members that are there and there's, people that have been there for a long time, they're gone and now they're back again. And then, what we read is, I'm sure, 2 or 3% of what's really happening, but still these aren't just small boards. We the public hear about them on the largest boards in the world.
Yes, that's true. There are controls around that, and there are certain governing laws around that also, especially if you're a
Interesting.
publicly traded
Oh, good point.
company.
Good point.
So there's some of those shenanigans are a little bit
Mm.
harder to do. I'm not saying that they don't, but think about GE several years ago. There were, I think, 19 people on their board. And when you get to an enterprise level, now you're talking about divisional structures, you're
Mm,
talking about
mm,
various businesses. So Walt Disney is one of those businesses, the family
mm,
of companies. I mean, they bought ESPN, they're into media, they're into movies, they have parks. That's complicated. So when you're looking at it from the enterprise level, there's a lot of governance, that international governance also, that apply. But small and mid-sized companies, sometimes the governance still applies, but if you're not
mm,
publicly traded, it's a different makeup in your audit committee. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You still have an audit committee. You still have people making sure the governance is good, especially because I always say you always want to be, public ready. Like, you want to be IPO
mm,
ready at any
mm,
time,
mm,
because if it's the right time for you, then you can get a pretty good infusion of cash and some great connection with the public and with your customers directly if you go public. It changes the game. There's a lot of rules and regulations and a lot of different things you have to do, but the accountability changes and the
mm.
structure of accountability changes also. So a Walt Disney or a GE, a Raytheon Technologies,
Yes.
you're going to see, I think, even a Starbucks, you're going to see
Mm,
much more buttoned up approach to their boards and the way that they operate and the work that they do at that level than you probably would say a startup that's about 4 years in, maybe still working on their Series A. Maybe they already have their Series A,
mm,
maybe the second tranche of their Series A. They have some capital, they're doing some work. If they're VC funded, they're going to have VC. Some of your investors are going to be on your board and they're going to be pushing for acceleration. They're going to be focused on a couple of things that's going to give them the rate of return that they're looking for, because they've backed you and they've pulled the investment
hmm.
together for you. So really,
Wow.
I'm geeking out a little bit here, Joe. So it can be a snoozer. It's not a snoozer for me, but it can be a
I
snoozer
like
for
it.
other people. So
Where does social science and culture mix?
in a business,
Yes.
so I think that, great question. I think that social science and business, it's going to be related to motivation, organizational effectiveness, organizational efficiency, but it's also going to be rated. So anything related to how teams are working well together. So if you have a sales team and for some reason they haven't been able to meet their numbers, let's say a scenario is the market has softened a little bit. Everybody knew that there was, let's, like, you and I own a business and you and I are talking, Joe, and you're telling me, Christa, the forecast isn't looking the same. Market's softening a little bit. I'm not sure what the sales team is going to be doing. And I'm looking at some of the analysis that you're talking to me about. I'm like, yeah, that's right too. One of the things you're going to be looking at is, how can we do things differently then?
Mm,
How can we motivate our sales team differently? Is there something we can do? You're going to be bringing in marketing. What other conferences might we be involved in? Is there something we can do to enhance our brand recognition? Is there a partnership we can think about that could be short term, midterm, long term, that if the market softens again, it de-risks us? It helps us benefit for the long term. Is there something we're not looking at? That is social science.
hmm,
How we're interacting, how we're talking to each other, how we're organizing the work together, how we're listening to each other, how we're willing to listen. That's culture.
hmm,
It's if you and I own a business together and you start talking and I finish your sentence, that's culture, right?
mm,
If it's a normative behavior, it's culture. And then other people start doing it, and then you don't have to take too many steps to see how it can impact performance. And so that's how the social science of business eventually impacts performance, because it's really, are you asking the right questions? Do people feel like they can think differently? Is everyone willing to ask new questions? Are you willing to challenge each other in a respectful way and still managing it with dignity and care for your fellow worker?
What kind of traits does a number one need to have? A CEO has to have their right hand. It's often overlooked, right? What kind of traits must that number one have?
When you say number one, are you talking about the CEO or are you talking about the people around the CEO?
Around the CEO.
Yeah. So I think courage is a really important
Courage.
trait. Yes. You need somebody, if you really, courage enables you to say things that are unpopular but need to
Mm,
be said.
mm,
And if you want your CEO to do well, then you need to have the courage to say things that are unpopular.
hmm,
And you need to do it because you're looking out for your CEO. We can split hairs and talk about how many people are jockeying for the same position, whether CEO feels sabotaged. I mean, there's a lot of, I've seen some really ugly
mm,
dystopian, I've
mm,
done some cleanup work and some turnaround work. It's not for the faint of heart.
mm,
And you don't see the good things in humans
mm,
typically when you arrive at the scene per se.
mm,
But I think a CEO should have a team around him or her. I don't think it should just be one person that they have that level of depth and trust with. It usually is just one person just because of chemistry. And there's that one person who maybe has been through a lot with the CEO. They've been in the trenches together. So there's nothing wrong with it. But if the CEO can have a team around him or her, I mean, if I have a team of people around me who I know they're going to say things that might reduce my patience, might limit my patience, or
mm,
might disrupt my thinking, or might
mm,
be inconvenient for me to hear. And I get agitated and annoyed, and then therefore they become uncomfortable.
mm,
You can see how pretty soon if that escalates, so it's not that I become agitated and annoyed anymore, but now I'm belittling them and disrespecting them and putting them
mm,
down,
mm,
or neglecting them and refuse to meet with them. And then their response to my behavior and my response, you can see how that devolves very quickly. So if you want a CEO to be successful, and for all the CEOs out there, if you want to be successful, you have to have people around you who have courage to
mm,
talk to you about the things that are disruptive and unpopular and ugly and uncomfortable, because that's a big part of your job. The success isn't just because of all the success, right? The success is because you're flipping the obstacles, so you're reducing the risk, or you're flipping the obstacles so you're not failing
mm,
anymore. And it's a really tough job. And the people around the CEO have tough jobs too, because your job is to make the CEO successful and also make your team successful and have the lens of a broad perspective
mm,
so that you know how your work impacts other people's work. You want to make sure there's a culture that looks at the business that way too. You have to be thinking about your shareholders. I mean, in the end, if you're in a business, a for-profit or a not-for-profit business, you need to make money.
mm,
That's the point. But you can do that with humanity in mind. It's a tough job. So I would say the number one trait is courage. I would say
mm.
after that, it's your regular garden variety of traits, Joe, like good communication skills, which includes listening, um, block and tackle business knowledge. And that's not just finance, like, especially with the calculations and some of the things we have these days. I'm not saying anyone can do finance. I mean, financial planning and analysis, called FP&A, they're some of my favorite people, because
Mm,
they're the ones that model and change the dials and how can we do these different things and get different outcomes. But they're working with the experts in the business to do that. So the block and tackle business is usually, how does a business run? And it's not just finance. If you were to ask anybody, what can you tell me about business? You'll probably hear at least 50% of the time, oh, I'm not a finance person.
mm.
Okay, what about the other 90% of what makes a business run well?
Yeah, and that cabinet that the CEO selects, you got to avoid the emperor has no clothes there, right? So hopefully he or
Yeah.
she decides properly who that is and not surround with yes people and this kind of thing. And it's not a board. It's very different what a cabinet could be.
Yes, and your team, you're absolutely right about how they can't say yes all the time, but they also, this is where the block and tackle of business comes in. They also
Mm,
have to know what yes might mean to the
mm,
business, because if
mm,
they think it's a great idea too, yeah, let's do it. I think that's a great idea. It's like, this is when you have to work as a team. And
mm.
it's interesting when you talk about the selection of your team, many times you are inheriting a team.
Ah,
So you don't always have the benefit of being able to select your team. And good CEOs, if they're brought in, a good, maybe the former CEO has retired, or maybe, and there's no succession plan. Again, for small and mid-sized companies, usually don't have that. For enterprise level, large enterprise level, a lot of times you have a succession plan, because it's a huge risk if you have a hole in your organization where top leaders need to be. So then there's the whole litany of things that you have to do if you're publicly traded and all those things too. So if you're a small, mid-sized company and you have a new CEO who comes in, let's say the former CEO is unseated, you have a new CEO who comes in, that CEO has to be hyper competent when
mm,
it comes to running a business. Because if you unseat a CEO, chances are that CEO has run the business down to a point where the board agreed you need a new CEO.
wow.
Now, this new CEO comes in. Are the people around the new CEO going to be honest? Were they honest with the last CEO? If you have a
Mm,
CEO who's failing, sometimes it's because people couldn't be honest with that CEO. Again, that courage is to make sure the people around you, including your boss, the CEO, is successful. So we'd all love to choose the team around us. I mean, sometimes you end up choosing like-minded people to the point where you have that group think and no one actually disagrees with anything because there's so much harmony. You do need some diversity of thought there and some people who are willing to challenge you. That's part of your selection process. If you don't have the benefit of a selection process, then you have to be savvy enough with people to know how to learn people really fast and how to understand motivations so that you can get that courage coming out of people in the moment.
yeah, you certainly do. There's a lot of layers there.
Oh, there's a lot of layers, yes.
Krista, has there been anything in recent history that you changed your mind on, like last month or so?
Like more than like ordering a meal and then changing my mind saying, "Oh wait, no, I want something else."
Now, why would you do that? Because you thought of something, you liked it, and then you saw something else?
No, I was just asking so I
I
could
say.
get closer to the context. I have done that. I have done that. And some, but it's usually because I'm down to, like, I'm the worst person to bring to a restaurant, because
Oh,
especially
boy.
if it's a menu that's longer than one page, because I see, like, ask me to spend money of like a $20 billion budget, no problem. I can make decisions just like that.
Yes.
Ask me if I want a meatball sub or chicken parm, and I'm just like,
Oh,
I don't
man.
know. Do I want chicken? It's the same sauce. Do I want
Yeah,
chicken
yeah,
or do I
yeah,
want meat?
yeah.
Do I want, like, do
You
I want to ask me about a garden salad with like blue cheese dressing versus a Caesar salad? Oh, I don't know. They're so different, but they're both salads. It's
yeah,
like, don't take me to I'm that
ask
person. Everyone's
me.
like, here we go. So usually I order the same thing when I go somewhere. I find something I like, or I order the same thing.
Mm.
Or I'm down to the two and I'm asking the person, I'm like, can you just, which one do you think I should get? And then they'll say something. I'll say, okay, that one. And then as they're walking away, I might be like, wait, no, you know what? I want the other one. And then I stop. Like, I'm definitely not the person who I've just ordered something and then it's halfway cooked in the kitchen. And I'm like, wait, can I just have something else now, please? Can you imagine? What a nightmare. But recently, so I am, in terms of my decision making style, I it changes based on the topic and based on the situation and based on how much, what
Evidence?
the consequences of
Yeah.
that decision are. I can't think of a time when I've lived with regretting a decision to the point where I had to change it
Mm,
or I changed my mind. I try to live a life without regret
mm.
and without stopping at the same time. I don't, meaning that I don't get that analysis paralysis. I'm not so hyped up about making a decision that I can't live with both answers
Mm.
or several different answers. I think that when it comes to decision making, people do need some level of flexibility. And so if there is something that you feel really strongly, I made a decision and it was just the wrong decision, I think you should go back and explain it and say that was the wrong decision.
Mm.
Like, how much of that meat have you cooked? Are the meatballs in the sub already? Because I'm not really sure about this. So I think that when it comes to decisions, I make decisions even in my life that I can live with, even if there's a portion of it that I regret. I'm just like, well, I'm in it now. So
Hmm.
I got to make my bed or, eat the sliced toast or however you want to say it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, Chris, because you've played musical instruments.
Yep.
It seems to me though that the art versus science. It seems that most of your decision weight is placed in science. Do you ever rely on your gut or art or anything? How does that play? Your gut.
Yeah. So science to me is an art. It has
Yeah.
mostly art.
Ah.
The piece of it that isn't as artistic is the result of quantitative analysis. So
Hmm.
there's some level of math if you're doing the quantitative work, because I'm trying to determine. Um, I'm sending out a survey, and I send it to you, and I'm trying to determine under what circumstance would you feel the most stressed out during a podcast interview, and I wouldn't be asking you then what would you do, because that's more
Mm.
qualitative. So I'm trying to like put it into little buckets to just determine, is there a correlation? And then I look at the data and the analysis. I say, oh, this is interesting. What am I trying to test? Let's say I'm trying to test that on hot days, Joe has shorter podcasts.
Mm.
And on cold days, he has longer podcasts. Like
Mm.
that's a testable hypothesis.
Interesting.
So I'll gather up all the data, I'll run it through a big system, right? An algorithm, actual algorithm. And I'll see, oh, there is a correlation to that, because there's a 95% confidence interval. There's a 95% I could say with 95% confidence. So it's considered significant. So that analytical piece is analysis. But the science was me asking the question to begin with,
Ah.
which requires a very creative, artistic, curious mind
Ah.
associated to it. And so I don't see them as separate.
Interesting.
I didn't go into physics. I
Right.
think if I went to physics, I would want a more concrete world. But then you think of astrophysicists, right? They're using physics to identify and study things we can't
Celestial
touch,
bodies. Yeah.
things we can't feel. But because of math, they're able to extrapolate. They can ask the right questions because they are scientists. Then they're able to extrapolate and create theory that says, well, we think
Mm.
this is what's happening. It's like bending time just before a black hole. And it takes years and years and years of studies and research and building upon other people's studies and research and their creative thinking, their explorative curiosity that brought them to asking a question or two or three or four, and then getting the data and running it through the analysis. There's qualitative analysis too, which is it's still a scientific method. So you still have to go through a regimented and rigid method, because
Mm.
that's the only time you can say with some level of confidence, it wasn't just willy nilly. I will tell you that I do make decisions based on gut feel. So there are times when it's like, is it going to be chocolate ice cream?
Mm.
Or is it going to be like Snickers, right? Like my gut decisions tend to be on things that have just a lower consequence
Sure.
associated to it. So while we're talking about boards and enterprise sized companies, you're getting that more analytical
Mm. Mm.
confidence
Mm.
coming out of Christa. But if you're talking about which painting I'm going to buy, that's going to be far more around how I feel when I'm looking at it versus how many people might feel the same way while they're looking at it.
Mm. So, Chris, I started my tech business there in the '90s in New Haven, south of you, and I was working way too hard and,
Mm.
14, 16-hour days. You're no stranger to this. So
Oof.
I'm
Yes.
in front of the doctor. I'm at 340 pounds, and she says to me, "If you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate." So, scared the life out of me. My daughter was just born. By the way, she just graduated, my youngest.
Amazing.
Yes,
Congratulations.
and so I spent the next 6, 7 months, lost about 120 pounds, kept it off. You can't, look at it as a finishing line. These are lifelong changes. So when I tell people the story, I could just see it in their eyes, Chris. They're like, what's your secret? How'd you lose the weight? And I say, there's no secret. Discipline. That's how I believe it's a spectrum of focus, willpower, etc. And uh, that's how I kept it off. So I keep it off. How does discipline play a role in your life?
I believe in focus and discipline. And I
Hmm,
believe in what I would call a flimsy discipline too. I
flimsy.
think there's a certain, yes, I think there's a certain, you need some level of flexibility even when you're disciplined. Like to me, discipline is a mindset, right? It's a level of commitment that goes deeper than, yeah, maybe I will. Like for you, you keep it off because you're motivated by consequence.
Mm,
You have a true belief that if you do some of these things, you will avoid some of the consequences you don't want to have,
mm, mm,
and you will benefit from the consequences that clearly demonstrates the value of your work and the value of the work that you're doing and how you're able to see your daughter just graduate and like
mm,
how amazing is that, right? But there's a mindset also that says I believe with the best discipline that says there are times when a flimsy discipline needs to take shape because we're humans, we're different in every moment in our life. We're the most talking about science, we're like the most difficult thing to study because we're so variable,
hmm,
right? Like I am a different person having had time with you than I was before
hmm,
this time. And so how can I study that if you had asked me a few questions before this, and then you ask those same questions after this, my answers would probably be different. They might not
mm,
be hugely different, but like I have experienced something different. And as a human, I'm variable. Now I see things a little differently. So that's what I mean with the flimsy
hmm,
discipline. You don't lose the goal you are looking to achieve. You don't take your eye off the ball. But there are times when discipline can really encroach upon our ability to be creative or our
mm,
ability to think differently, our ability to be flexible. A
hmm,
lot of times people think of rigidity when they think of discipline. They think of something very regimented and rigid, and that is what discipline is. And sometimes, yes, that's what discipline is. For sure, sometimes that's what discipline is. Sometimes discipline isn't that rigid.
mm,
Sometimes it really is about the mindset that you have made a commitment to keep a goal going, that you haven't just arrived to that goal, but it's something that you keep going to the extent of your life. And it's something that has become a part of you. And so it's almost like at that level, discipline isn't really a choice, it's a lifestyle, as they
mm,
say. So what it's done for me is there are times when I've had to push through, I've had to muscle through, I had to get the work done. And I don't stop until the work
mm,
is done. I was the person behind Northeastern University being able to reopen during COVID. So it was me and 80 other people too. But when they said, how are we going to do this? It was my design flow.
wow.
It's going to go from here to here to here. And then myself and a coworker, it was us that put together a CLIA certified lab in 8 weeks. And then my sponsor, the person who hired me to do this, looked at me and said, we still don't have a swabbing place. We think it's going to be here. I need you to do that and
Mm,
design it. So those were like 90-hour weeks. I mean, it was just you just talking about your 14, 16-hour days. I
yes.
mean, we did all of that in 13 weeks, and it had to be we had highly regulated still. It was in a pandemic. It was a virus we didn't know anything about yet. It was human tissue that was going through PCR machines and so forth. Very,
Wow.
very complex.
Wow.
My level of focus and discipline got me through that, but it got my team through it too. And again, it wasn't just me. There were a lot of other people involved, but the work that I was doing with 2 other people at the time, it was the 3 of us were working. We were so dedicated and committed to the outcome and what it was we had to do that that was my life for 13 weeks. I can't have flimsy discipline during that time. That's the real deal. That is the way the world works in certain times, especially if you're in highly regulated industry. Some people are like, we're too regulated. I'm like, well, if you know what an adulterated parenteral, what happens if somebody's injected with an adulterated product, then suddenly you don't mind the regulations. It's like I was in high tech for a little while. I was in a regulated aspect of high tech, but I was also in an aspect where some fringe parts and features that weren't under a regulated, they were selling features that didn't exist. They were selling features. They're like, oh, we're going to do the calculations for this and this. Well, the system doesn't do that. Well, can't you just make it do? No, the system doesn't do that. Like it's never been done. It's never been tested. Like that's not what the system does. I don't even know if the development team knows about that. Like that's not what happens. Like that doesn't happen. Typically in highly regulated industries, you can't just sell something because you thought about it the night before. I mean, you look at even Facebook, all these features are pushed out. I think Apple's one of the few that doesn't sell something that they don't absolutely have. Like, this is what it is. They release things all the time. You find out about it after it's released. And if there's a problem, it's fixed within 3 weeks with another push. So discipline gets the work done. Like in my world, discipline gets the work done. It also sometimes gets rigid work done because people feel so disciplined. There are times when part of your discipline has to be a level of flexibility. Like we can get really meta about this too. But the discipline is I have to keep my brain loose. I have to keep my brain loose. Like you have to be disciplined with that. People like structure. Sometimes you can't have that level of structure. That's when you're in a position in high tech to say, yeah, that's what they were doing 5 years ago. Like that disciplined mind sometimes will bring forth the best time 5 years ago. And then they cannot flex out of that because they're so disciplined, right? So the flexible disciplined mind says, I know I have to loosen this up. I'm still stuck 5 years ago, Joe. Help me get out of 5 years, buddy, because like I need to be more flexible. And my discipline is learning how to be more flexible. So as with all of my answers, there's a lot of layers there. But that's how I see it. There are times when I am disciplined every day. And there are times when my discipline is rigid and I have to get the work done whether I like it or not. And there are other times when my discipline is flimsy and I know what the lane is, but I can do a lot of different things in that lane.
Yes, you kind of widen the scope. Interesting. You mentioned consequences. I still feel, Christa, to this day that there's the 340-pound guy trying to get out. And so,
Yeah.
and so I slip and, perhaps don't follow a diet for a couple of days and I kind of fall back. And it's interesting how you kind of delineate, use the word flimsy between, widening and closing those boundaries. Fascinating. What motivates you, Christa?
People. I am intensely interested in people and I want people to thrive. I've seen the devastation of the human spirit when you have terrible leaders in place and just really bad managers and how low the morale can be. I've had that. I've experienced really bad managers. I've had quite a few of them in my background. And then I see what happens when you change that. And it is incredible. I mean, it's like that scene in The Wizard of Oz when she walks out of the house and everything's in Technicolor. Right? It's really like that. When you give your people and organizations an opportunity to thrive, the magic that can happen is so amazing. And when you look at the leading performing companies, they have that magic and they invest in it. And when you look at the laggards, it doesn't take long to read through it and be like, oh, they're not taking care of their people. And the tragedy of it, Joe, is it just doesn't take that much to take care of good humans. It just doesn't. Like, you're always going to have your squeaky wheels. You're always going to have your entitled personalities. You're always going to have the people who, no matter what you give them, it's not enough. Like, that's true everywhere. Go down the street to your favorite place that you eat or a local bar where you might watch a game. You're going to find those people there too. It's like, that's the wonderful world we live in. But what you can do to tap into people's motivation, to tap into their that sense of that sense of, I'm here to do the best job I can do every day. And you know what? Today might not be as good as yesterday because I didn't get the kind of sleep I wanted. Maybe somebody has a newborn or they're dealing with a parent that's very sick or something, but that's the whole human that you're getting that day. And your job is to get the best you can out of that good human for that day. And the gains that you get are so much bigger than the investment you make when you do it the right way. So those are the things that motivates me. And I'd say that professionally and to some extent personally, that's like my greatest motivation, is if I can have just a little bit of an impact in that area, then that's a good day for me, because I like to see success happen and I like to see goals exceeded and I like to see enrichment in the world and I like to see people smiling because they're like, that was good. That was a good day. You can't smile all the time. That's fine. I'm a realist. I'm a realist. You can't do the kind of work I do without that. But I'm a hope spring eternal kind of person too. And what you can get out of people with just a little bit of investment goes such a long way.
Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it. So having people thrive and impact motivates you. How do you measure success given that motivation?
Sometimes I don't measure success the way that you would expect it. Sometimes it's more of, is that company still doing the work that they agreed to do? Are they running surveys and exceeding some of their goals for what they're doing? What are their retention rates looking like for their top performers? What do their KPIs? What are some of their OKRs? Whatever letter soup everybody wants to say. But what are your metrics looking like? Like, those are when my metrics feel really good. Or when I get people who tell me, I'm still using what you said. It's the best advice I ever got. Or I'm finally coming out of that trauma with the board. I feel human again. Thank you. I mean, those are my metrics.
That's wonderful to be part of someone's success, no matter how small, is so rewarding. I am so glad we set this up. I thank you so much for your time. I love your podcast, Ask Christa. Anybody watch? I can't do that, what you do. It's incredible because you just kind of get a question, you just answer. It's wonderful. And it's like these clips and you do such a great job. Anybody watching or listening, how can they get in touch with you, Christa?
So if they're interested, first of all, thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. I got to this order of magnitude where I couldn't ignore it anymore. And it feels very natural for me to do it. I don't think I could do anything else. So I really appreciate your inputs and your support. It means a lot to me. If they're interested in the podcast, they can follow and also submit a question. And you could submit a question even if you're not following. I'm not tracking. I'm not following. I'm doing this because of a self-motivating feature that I have as being Christa. And I've just had a lot of people ask me to do this kind of thing. So they can go to askchrista.com. That's Christa with a CH. And they can submit their question. They can follow. They can look at, they can sign up for a newsletter that goes out every Sunday night, positioned to boost people up for Monday morning. It's also included in the blog. So if people don't feel like signing up, if they're like, oh, I have so many emails already in my inbox, you just, take a little step into the blog side of that. And they can also follow me on LinkedIn. They can reach out to me. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for me, Christa Dhimo, on LinkedIn. And if anybody's interested in some of the work that I do, they can go to christadhimo.com also and see some of that work there too.
Like you said, Christa, Christa, and Dhimo
That's
is
right.
Dhimo. I'll make sure to put it in the show notes.
Thank you,
I
Joe.
thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm up in the great Boston area, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
Please, or maybe a slice.
A slice would be even better. You be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.